Welcome to Women Winning Divorce. I am your host, Heather Quick. I am an attorney, entrepreneur, author, and founder of Florida Women's Law Group, the only divorce firm for women by women. I love thinking big, thinking outside the box, creating creative solutions for women, and empowering women to win in all aspects of their life. Our approach at Florida Women's Law Group is to provide women with a strategy to not only achieve their objectives, but win at life. I believe that what may show up as adversity is simply an opportunity to change and improve your life. In each episode, I sit down with innovative professionals and leaders who are focused on how you can be your best self before, during, and after divorce. In these conversations, we are looking at how women can win at life. I have the unique opportunity to meet women when they are at a transition period of life. But that is only the beginning to becoming your best self and winning at life on your terms. With our guests, we enjoy the opportunity to explore ways all women can win and enhance their life, no matter where they are in their journey. Because divorce is just a point in life, not the end and not what defines you, rather a catalyst for your growth.
Welcome to today's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney of Florida Women's Law Group. Today, I am joined by my assistant, JD Fleischer. She started with us a few years ago as an intern and has since returned after finishing her undergraduate as well as her master's, but before she goes to law school. And she is helping me in the running of the firm and managing all things that I need to do. Welcome back to the show, JD.
Thank you, Heather. It's so good to be back. I'm excited.
Well, once again, I get to be on the hot seat today, and I am answering some questions for our listeners that I guess want to know a little bit more about me.
Of course, we all do. And this first question is super relevant to me right now as well. So, Heather, can you share with me and our listeners, why did you choose to go to law school?
Well, it was something I had wanted to do from a young age. And I was influenced by my grandfather, who was a lawyer and a judge, as well as my uncle, who was a lawyer for many years. And so I just always grew up with that influence. My mother was a CPA, and that really didn't hold a lot of allure to me. But the law did. And I just really thought that was exactly what I should be doing. So I always had that in my head that was what I was going to do, was go to law school.
Now, when you were deciding what kind of law you wanted to do, what drew you to specialize in family law specifically?
Well, that was pretty much not a straight line, so you never you don't have to, it's okay with like your first decision. I feel like if you divert and, swirl around a couple times and figure out what you want to do. So originally, I was a prosecutor. That was my first job. And as far as I was concerned, I really kind of thought that was the only job as a lawyer would be to be a prosecutor. And it truly was one of the most fun things I've ever done. I really enjoyed being in the courtroom, picking a jury, questioning witnesses, and, getting people sent to jail. And, you can ask anybody who knows me well. And that was something that I really got a lot of joy out because I believe very firmly they were guilty. And let's keep this in mind. I didn't have as much perspective. I was much younger, and the law was very black and white. I was very much a law and order girl. My grandfather was, he was a big law and order person. So it was all misdemeanors though. So let's be clear. Maximum sentence is a year. But boy, I was always going for the max. And we did do a lot of DUIs, but all in all, I felt like I could relate to people.
Yeah.
So I could relate to the jurors. And, what I learned at that time is you really have to be able to do a minimum of 3 things at one time if you're going to be in a courtroom. You have to, listen to what you're saying, but you have to listen to what is being said either by the witness or the opposing counsel. And while you're listening, you have to be formulating your response or argument. And that is something I'm just very good at. And that's why if a client is ever been with me or, another attorney and you're in a case and you're in litigation in the courtroom, it's like, don't talk to me. I got so many things going on. You could write notes, but, you have to be, good. You do have to listen to what other people are saying, but your brain has to be working on your response. And so anyway, I loved that aspect. But once you leave the prosecutor's office, and which I did, it was not something I was going to do forever. And then, what most people do is they go on to the defense, right? They go and say, oh, now I'm going to be a private criminal defense attorney. Mm-hmm. Well, that really was not for me. I like putting people in jail. I wasn't big on getting them out. And again, we're talking about, the lower level crimes. I'm not talking about anything, on the extreme, but it really didn't seem to be something my heart was in. And I know so many great criminal defense attorneys and their heart is all into it, right? That was just not me. And so what I began to really have more cases drawn to me was in family law. I had a lot of that experience, and I started to find I could truly make a difference in someone's life as a family law attorney. So I got a lot more of satisfaction out of that. And that's kind of really where that started.
Got it. That makes sense. And so obviously you specialize in family law now, but even more specifically, you own and operate a women's only law firm. So how was that decision made and what kind of went behind that?
So that was something that manifested itself over time. Mm-hmm. When I opened my firm, just like everybody else, did family law, represent men and women, both sides, and you're building up your practice. So you don't have as much courage to say no, maybe to some kind of cases. And through all that time in developing my business, I was also doing a lot of personal development and really understanding why I do what I do and what kind of business do I want to build and grow and why, right? Who do I want to help? Well, I want to help women. And that's really what it came down to. I mean, my mother was divorced when I was little, and then subsequently a couple more times. And so was my father. So, I like to say I had a front row seat to a lot of family law drama and divorce before I ever even went to law school. And so when I would speak with clients, like I recognize those stories, right? I recognize patterns that people go through. And the more I did it, and as I, grew and, was married, had family, I just resonated with women and their struggles, reminding me of the struggles my mother had. And I thought, that's who I really want to help, because I can maybe give them some confidence and help them really understand their worth in this marriage and fight for them to get what they deserve when maybe they are just too tired to, or just don't feel like they are worthy of anything in the divorce.
Right. So talk me through a little bit your motivation behind not only, like you mentioned, becoming a divorce attorney and working with women, but owning your own business and founding the firm Florida Women's Law Group.
Well, and so that just happened out of, the economics of the time. It was back in 2010. And so the real estate, bubble had burst, as people like to say. And I had been kind of playing around, with starting my own firm. But my husband's business was in construction and real estate development. And that was, on the low end. So it was time for me to either go work for another firm or do something, with all of this experience. And so that's really what started that. I was like, okay, I'm going to start my own business because, then you have the freedom and the flexibility to do it the way you want and help the people you want. And so then that's where all that evolved, as far as, okay, this is the kind of business I want. These are the kind of people I want to help. And I want to help women only in family law. And then, as we begin to build the staff, it made sense that we wanted women in the firm because we're helping women. And a lot of what we understand and know about women comes from our personal experience. I mean, JD, we've got over 30 women in the office, all with, many different backgrounds, life experiences that can really allows them to have so much empathy, understanding, and sometimes tough love for women that's different if we had, any kind of different makeup.
Yeah, Absolutely. It's a great environment to work in and especially be a client in. So I'm super grateful for that. And I know a lot of times just working here, I hear clients, they understand that family law includes divorce, but can you walk me through some of the other services that the firm provides outside of just divorce?
Yes. So a lot of times you need enforcement, meaning you were divorced, you know, usually it happens around 5 years, 3 or 5 years ago. And you're like, listen, things aren't going the way they're supposed to. He's not doing what he's supposed to,
Right.
owes me money, or I want to change it. So that's a lot. So anything related to a divorce, post-divorce, we do, if individuals, do have a child together. And even if they're not married, those are paternity cases. And if there's disputes, this is what we do. It's in family law. We've really started doing more prenups, and those are prenuptial agreements. So prior to the marriage, really try to educate women on the best ways to protect yourself and, to begin the marriage with a good conversation about finances and your roles in the marriage. And that can be really, memorialized in a prenup. Sometimes we do a postnup. Within what we do, we represent women in domestic violence injunction cases. That's not a huge practice with what we do, but it is, there's certainly a lot of it. And there are many women we help through that process as well.
Gotcha. So now in this stage of your legal journey, you've built this incredible firm over the past several years. What exactly is your role now? Are you still practicing? What are you doing?
Well, I do a lot of things actually,
Yeah.
quite a bit, and of course
Yes.
I still have a handful of cases, and I have clients that I work on cases with,
Mhm.
which is great. But a lot of what I do is the building of the business, the management, and also a lot of the training and strategy.
Right.
So with family law and litigation, strategy is so important. And that's a big part of what I do with the attorneys, help them with strategy. I do a lot of training and education so that our legal team gets better and, more competent. So we do a lot of that, as well as all the marketing and, of course, training in our sales and marketing department. And, we also, have a lot to do with our client experience, and we work on that. And, probably another 50 things that I can't think of at the moment.
Oh, yes, I can.
All right. Well, JD, it is the perfect time now for our first break. And listeners, we so appreciate it if you would leave us a review so that other women going through the divorce process can find our show and join our community. We will be right back. We are back from our break. And again, today I'm joined by JD Fleischer, my assistant here at Florida Women's Law Group. And she has got me on the hot seat today. So go for it, JD.
Always a good time. Now, I know we focused on the first segment about who you are and how you got to be where you are today. But for our listeners, what exactly is family law?
Obviously, family law focuses on issues involving family relationships, finances, and divorce. So marriage, money, and divorce, are the three main, but also children. Really, if there's anything as it relates to children in the family,
Mhm.
that is pretty much encompassed in family law. And, there's not everyone can understand, right? They say family law and they call us, but we do narrow our focus as it relates to marriage, divorce, custody issues, and enforcement. We do not deal with the Department of Children and Families. That's a big area that some folks would think, oh, that's family law when
Right.
DCF is involved and it's dependency court. That is in its own, they have their own court, their own circuit, and it's very specialized. And we leave that to those who specialize more in that. So we don't do that as much. But sometimes there's guardianship issues around children or step parent adoption. So it's thinking marriage, money, divorce, and children. Kind of within that, you may fall within, what the family law range is.
Got it. Now, something you haven't mentioned is estate planning. So is estate planning family law or is it included in something else?
It is its own thing. And but it makes sense, right? You think, well, I'm a family. I have a family. I should call a family law lawyer, which totally does make sense. But And, estate planning, I'm thinking, well, I don't live on a big estate, right? I have a family, it should be family law, but estate planning is different. That is really, creating your will, a trust, something that, you absolutely, everybody does need. It's just very specialized in that type of law as well as tax implications. So it is not really something which is in the family law purview.
Got it. Now you mentioned something that includes my next question. So a little bit about wills. What exactly is wills included at all in family law, and in your professional opinion, who needs a will?
So generally, no, we do not draft wills. That you need to go to an estate planning attorney for that. That is its own specialty. But everybody needs a will. Everybody should have a will. If you have any money or any property or children, family, you definitely should have a will. And it can be very simple, but Florida is very specific. And I know for our listeners who have been listening for a long time, they know it's different by state to state in all areas of the law. And even though there can be similarities, your wills and trust in your state, those laws are really, really different by state to state. So it's very important that if you don't have a will, that you get one and you talk with an attorney within the state you live in, because that can be so very specific. You can't do it yourself here in Florida. It's just something that, and you're no longer here. So no one can speak on your behalf. And that's why it's so important. And particularly if you have children, there are very many things you can do to protect your children financially, as well as, who would be their guardian, things like that. Right. So it's not what we do. I've done my share of it over the years, and we can advise you on who to see, but it's something absolutely that's very important.
So I know you mentioned that two separate types of law, both estate planning and will versus family law. However, for our listeners who may be going through the divorce process, what do they need to keep in mind regarding their will and estate planning if they're going through this process of divorce?
Well, you really aren't to change anything while you're in the middle of a divorce. But what you need to understand is that that is something that probably needs to be changed when you have completed your divorce. So, there may be some things. Often we do talk to clients about, who has their power of attorney if something were to happen to them in the middle of the divorce. But it's just something to talk to your lawyer about and ask, because when you're in the middle of the divorce, you're still married. So it's not really wise to do a new will while you are still married. You need to wait until your divorce is finalized.
What about changing your name? Can you change your name in the divorce process, or is that separate as well?
No, you can absolutely change your name in the divorce process. And we really recommend it, that if you think you may want to change your name, and I will clarify, because I used to think it was only you could go back to a former name that you had. But one of our attorneys, I had a client once who's like, well, can I just change my name? I always wanted to change my name anyway. Can I just do that? And it's like, I don't know, right? Like I had to research it, and apparently, yes, you can. So, that's a great way to start your new life and new identity. But it's something that you and your attorney should absolutely talk about during that process, because otherwise you'll have to go to court in a separate instance to change your name. And when it's part of a divorce, it is, kind of like a routine thing. Many people do. A lot of people don't. Sometimes they're like, I don't want to bother with my driver's license, my social security, right. Maybe all these things, or, my licensed name as an attorney is one name. I don't want to change it. So I get that, but at least have that conversation, because often if you leave it out later, you may change your mind.
Got it. So you would say that's a disadvantage of changing your name? I know you mentioned some of the advantages. Are there any others that you can think of?
I don't know. I've never been through that process. Right. Mm-hmm. So, my mother kept one of her husband's names, and she still does, even though I asked her to change it. So, I guess it's a very personal decision. Right.
Right.
I think when you have children, you tend to want to have that same last name. And so maybe it's a thought, really. It's like, hey, before you get married, why don't you think, do you really want to change your name?
Right.
I've been married so long, and a lot of people even, older than me, like we just did it. Right. And nobody really had that conversation. But I think nowadays, more individuals, more women keep their name. And over time, right? Like all the things, especially as a professional, you're building your career and your reputation with your name. And then if that's, say, your husband's name, you got divorced, you're like, oh, I'm just going to be stuck with it. You're not necessarily, but I think the better question is think about it before you change your name. And then really think about it in the divorce as to, if you want to start over and if you really want his last name after being divorced.
Right. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit. I know you mentioned before that the firm deals with a little side or a little bit of domestic violence cases. Is domestic violence really considered a family law issue? Or is there a point that it becomes a criminal matter?
It can be both. Okay. So when you are seeking protection against domestic violence through an injunction, which is a protective order, that is a civil matter, meaning there's no jail. It's not criminal. It's all civil court. And that's when it's comes within the purview of what I would say family law. Many times, the act or whatever happened that then, preceded the victim seeking an injunction, that was a criminal instance. And so then the police may be involved in that. So they really run completely separate and, kind of intersect, but not really. You're going to have different judges and different attorneys in those cases. And so there may be a criminal case, but that will be completely separate from an injunction.
Got it. So now switching from family law and marriage, let's talk about family law and money. Everyone's favorite controversial question. What is a prenup?
So a prenuptial agreement is a contract between two individuals who are about to get married. They have not married yet. It is only effective and valid if they, in fact, do get married. So you can sign a prenup, but if there's no marriage, it doesn't matter. And it essentially outlines the terms and conditions of which you both will abide by if there's a divorce. And it's very, I think, common because of publicity and TV, social media, just everything out there that we see celebrities and it's referenced the prenup. Mm-hmm. And a good prenup and, folks that both entered into it, equally, can end up getting divorced as quickly as Tom Brady and Giselle. But right. That's the intent most of the time.
Now, I think you said this before, but just one more time for our listeners, who needs a prenup?
I really think everybody should. And, I get it if and you ought not be getting married, frankly, if you don't have anything, right? Or you don't have, you probably need to work on establishing yourself and your, occupation before you get married. But that was just a little side note of advice. But you should, everybody should, because these are conversations, mostly because these are conversations you should have before you get married. Right. You should talk about money. You should talk about children, and you should talk about how we want to go about that. And that's, I think, where too many people don't have that conversation before marriage and during, and then hardly even after, right? When they're divorcing. Mm-hmm. So it's a good starting point for that.
You mentioned the references of prenups in pop culture. We often see in movies this thing called like an ironclad prenup or a diamond-clad prenup. Is this a real thing?
Well, only in Hollywood, right? But that I can't remember the name of the movie, but it had George Clooney, so that's the part I remember. And Catherine Zeta-Jones, great movie, all about prenups, and there are ways to make them, more stronger than others and to be upheld, But I don't think there's never any guarantee one way or another, but. Right. There are a lot of things that you can do to give a prenup more validity in the event it's challenged. And one of those is doing it, early, plenty of time before the marriage and no duress, not when people are upset, and certainly not signing it before you walk down the aisle.
Right. Now, hand in hand with the prenup is a postnup. How are those two things different?
Well, as the name suggests, post, so it's post-nuptial, post being married. They're actually very, very different because now that you are married, you have certain rights. As a married couple, you have certain rights to inherit. You have the right, to be decision maker for one another, certain things within insurance and lots of things in someone's house. There's a lot of rights that you get by virtue of being married, depending on the state that you live in. So now if you sign a postnup, now you have to give things up. In a prenup, you don't have those rights. So you can waive things, but you don't have them yet, if that makes sense. So because of that, a postnup needs to be more detailed and it needs to have more information and discovery and disclosure and definitely more counseling with an attorney in order to make sure that it is upheld.
I feel like I don't hear about these as often as I hear about a prenup. So in your experience, have they been popular with your clients or, how often do you see that?
Yeah, we see those. I would say, those are like a 10% of, the prenups that we see, but many married individuals go through difficult times. And part of that can be related to trust issues. What I've seen in my experience is that this is a tool that can help people really keep their marriage together. Maybe as a, good faith sign, like, hey, I'm willing to work on this. So I need to know if we divorce, you're not going to make it the most difficult thing. So let's iron these things out. Because there's got to be something in it for each party with which to do it, right? In the prenup, okay, the thing in it is to get married, right? If you're saying, hey, we're not doing this unless I get married. Within a postnup, what's in it for me, right? Why would I sign that unless I wanted something, which maybe I wanted my husband to work on the marriage or he wants me to work on the marriage. So we're willing to meet halfway. So there's got to be something in it. Sometimes we'll come to clients and they will ask that. And I'll say, listen, what's in it for him? Why is he going to sign this? You need to really have that discussion in order to for that to come to work. You don't want to just come. You're not going to just come to us as an attorney and say, I want to post up. And we're going to say, fine, we draft the whole thing without asking you, well, is he even going to sign it? Have you talked about it? Because if you haven't talked about it, don't go spending the money drafting it because then it's just a waste.
Right. So another fun intersection of finances and family law, child support and paternity, which we see quite often here at the firm. How is paternity determined? I think of all the crazy TV shows and divorce court currently. That's what I'm thinking of.
Well, paternity cases are essentially unmarried couples who have children. And so it doesn't say if you go into court just because you didn't get married. You do still have to go to court to determine issues. Well, one, parentage. Sometimes there's DNA tests involved. That's important if it's contested or questioned, because then there's going to be financial responsibilities ordered by the parents. The parents are going to be ordered by the state to be financially supporting a child. So if DNA is in question, that's very important to have that done. And then also, what the time sharing is going to be, or as what people think normally, custody. Where is the child going to go? And, in my experience over the years, I have found that very often judges tend to rule 50-50 on paternity, even before the law made the change. I don't understand it. But it seems to be a real common thing. And that can be very, very hard for mothers of young children to have to deal with that issue. So again, it's really important to ideally think about who you're going to have children with and maybe have done a little due diligence before that, because it's just unfortunate. It just gets really, really messy in court. And what's messy are the feelings. Because there's really no financials. It's just how unresolved feelings for one another and the child. So it can be very challenging.
Right.
Let's take a short break. We'll be right back, listeners. If you are enjoying the show and guests, please leave us a review and share with a friend. We are back from our last break. And again, today I'm joined by JD Fleischer, who is turning the tables and asking me questions today. And we're defining family law for our listeners and providing an overview of what we do at Florida Women's Law Group.
So in this last segment, we're going to discuss how divorce is a huge component of family law. In a divorce, a word or concept that usually comes up early on is alimony. Can you share with our listeners what alimony is?
Absolutely. Alimony is financial support that is paid by one spouse to the other. Generally, well, not generally, I mean, it has to be determined you have the ability to pay and that your spouse has the need. And so it doesn't mean necessarily that one spouse is not working. They can still be working. It's just that they're not making enough to cover their expenses. So that's where it is. It's covering that gap. And it's been around for a long time. This year, the law changed a lot, but it's a tool that is, the purpose is, as a married couple, you've combined finances, family, and there's been a lot of support there. And often one person's career is maybe not as advanced as the other, and or they never really worked. They aren't, they don't make as much money, and it's going to be more difficult for them financially after the divorce based on what they're able to make. So it can help them during that period and that transition.
Is it granted often?
It's, I guess in a lot of the cases that we see it is, right? Because they come to us many times for that. That is something that we've certainly perfected over the years and really working with women to maximize the amount of alimony they could get. And now it's more of a formula, but you still have to understand that formula as well as exceptions for that. And then, and likewise, we help women like minimize their, exposure for alimony as well.
Right.
So it's hard for me to say how often it's granted, because it's definitely ordered in cases where it's appropriate. It may, and usually one of my sayings has always been, the question is for how long and how much,
right?
But it's going to be ordered. It's just, those are the details that matter very much, to every individual, whoever's receiving and paying. So it gets ordered most of the time when it's appropriate. And it's really important to make sure that you have, somebody advocating so that if you are entitled to alimony, you're getting the maximum amount you're entitled to.
Is it just one amount or is it continuous? How is that determined?
So that's a very good question. And usually it's, the very most common is a monthly amount.
Okay.
Is going to be like, say, $3,000 a month for 3 years. Right. And that's going to, in that particular case example, that would be maybe somebody who hadn't been married that long, probably less than, 10 years, or maybe around that time. And, but just is going to need a few years to get back up to speed. And that's really important for alimony, recipients and women to understand is it's time to come up to think about a plan, right? What am I going to do afterwards? Because frankly, nobody has an obligation to support you. And the law does support long-term marriages and husbands continuing to financially support women. Mm-hmm. And the law is supportive of that. And I think that's true. But, as, for listeners who are younger women and, hey, if you have the benefit to stay home with your kids for a period of time, I think that's great. But you really need to think about what are you going to do to provide for yourself? Because no one has an obligation to financially support another adult, not even your children. No court's going to order you to financially support your children when they turn 18, which in most of them, of course, aren't capable. I mean, they are capable. We just don't make them support themselves at 18. But, unless they are, developmentally challenged and they have special needs. But I think it's so important with, all the opportunities that exist out there for women that they really recognize that and recognize that if they're sacrificing their career for their husband, get a prenup, get a postnup to talk about how he's going to help you get back on your feet if you divorce. because that's going to be a difficult transition. And if there's one income now, and now we have two households, it's going to get divided, but it honestly is going to be, it's not going to be the same, right? I mean, it's the same pot of money in two houses. So it may still be a struggle even when you're ordered to receive alimony.
Now, Heather, is it possible for someone to live strictly off of alimony?
Oh, very often. Very often. It's just going to depend on what that financial situation is. It may not be the same, even though everybody's heard, oh, he's got to support me in the style I've become accustomed to and, our standard of living. But it's the money. It's the money, ladies. Like, you just have to add it up. I'm a big proponent. If you're entitled to alimony, I'm going to help you get as much as possible. But now there's a formula. So it's gonna require you might have to, if you want to live off of it, you're going to have to make some changes maybe.
Right. Now you mentioned different types of alimony based on how long you've been married. Are there several different types of alimony, and does that determine how often or how much you get?
It can. And this is probably not the best time to go into all the differences because that can be just so confusing, but sometimes it's lump sum. There may be cases where you just get a big pot of money, right? And then that's like, okay, do with it what you want. Those aren't as common. It's most often, over a period of time in a monthly. And I think the different types of alimony are really based on the amount of years married and how long it will last. So it may be a 2-year type alimony. That would just be bridge the gap alimony. It might be temporary. That's just during the divorce. And then the longer durational. The biggest change in 2023 is that permanent alimony was removed from the statute. That used to be, for long-term marriages. And that was basically until you remarry or die or he dies. So pretty long-term.
Now, for our last topic of the day, Heather, I want to talk about how a divorce and family law involves children. We hear the word custody a lot. What does the law mean by custody, and are there different types?
Well, the word in itself has changed. It's time sharing. Time, because you share time with your children. They are not property. We do not own them. And so therefore we don't have custody of them. And, so that, but people just still say custody all the time. And so that's why we say that, because then they know exactly what we're talking about. And then, of course, our listeners understand, okay, now it's called time sharing. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. And that is the effort by the Florida courts to create a gentler, kinder family law process, right? Because it's a family. And, some of our guests before, I can't remember which one, but she was amazing. And it really is true. It's like, this is somebody that you have had a child with and got married to. And then, you enter this court process and it can be so polarizing and turn people who really, hopefully, deep down have the same goals, let's say, for their children. But yet so much of the court process kind of keeps them from achieving that together because they can feel so adversarial. But that's custody. And within that, which also sounds very like medicinal, right? Or so-called a parenting plan. Like, are you kidding me? Like now you're giving me a plan. Like, why didn't we get a plan when we were pregnant, right? That's when we needed a parenting plan to tell us what to do and how to do it. But that's really a big part of why when you go to court and we're dealing with children, we're going to work through the time sharing issues, and you have to have a parenting plan, which is usually, quite a detailed document.
Well, you read my mind, because my next question is, what exactly is a parenting plan?
So parenting plan outlines the way that two parents are supposed to behave. A lot of common sense, a lot of things that we would hope people would behave, but being respectful, not disparaging the other. And then here is the big one that's hard: sharing information. A lot of marriages break up, dissolve because of a lack of communication. and or an inability. And I think it's just, as I've grown as an individual and matured and done a lot of studying and learning, I think it's just people have different types of communication. And so they just are, it's not that they're unable to communicate. They're both think they're communicating quite clearly. They just communicate in very different ways. So neither one receives the information. But that's a big part of the parenting plan. How are you going to communicate with one another? Ideally, it's by talking.
Right.
Believe it or not, JD, that happens very rarely, at least in the ones that we see. It's got to be by text messages or by various family law apps. But it details how you're going to communicate, how you're going to identify, when there's an emergency or when there's an issue that requires input. It also talks about schedules and holidays and, because that's a big thing. And it is generally, it really focuses around the school calendar, because all children are in school, whether it's homeschool or regular school, there's a school calendar. Excuse me. And that serves the basis generally for the scheduling. So that's a big deal because holidays are important. And when the kids are out of school, it talks about that. It talks about travel, about who's going to watch the kids when you can't. How do you travel? What do you have to do to let your, ex know about traveling? So the parenting plan is really detailed, but really, really important and worth spending the time on, because it brings up a lot of issues that probably do need to be discussed and agreed upon.
Now, when can I or my ex get in trouble legally for not following this plan that we created?
That one is a tricky one, because, it's more than annoying. It is beyond frustrating. If at pick up and drop off, they're always late, right? Is that really worth going back to court? Not necessarily. There may be ways to work around it, like communicate with the spouse, the lateness, because that would drive me crazy. I'll just tell you, JD, but I also could potentially be a big violator of that as well, right? You've seen me, how I race around sometimes. So, but that's where talking to an attorney, like, okay, so if it's my time, I should go pick them up, right? I shouldn't disrupt your life. You should be at your house. I have to go get them, right? So you're not sitting there waiting somewhere and I'm not home yet. And then if I'm done, I should return them. And so that way there can be some ways to minimize that, especially one of the best ways is at school, right? I drop them off at school on Monday and it's your week. And then I pick them up on Friday, or I pick them up a week later, Monday after school. For some people that works really, really well. So the biggest issue I would say, generally when somebody comes to us and say he's not following it, it's like, all right, well, give me the list, right? Because if we're going to go to court, let's make sure it's worth your time. Because if it's just a chronic lateness, maybe we can work that out. If it's the fact that they don't return them on the right day, or they take them out of state or keep them when they're not supposed to have them, that might be worth it. If there's real disputes on medical things and education, that's probably worth going to court on. If it has to do with child support, that's easy to get. Well, I say easy to get enforced. It just depends how much and if it's worth it. But, the only way to know if it's worth moving to enforce that agreement is talking to an attorney.
Okay.
And how much trouble they're going to get in legally, I don't know. The court can't make them be a better parent, but maybe, we can make them pay things they haven't paid, things like that. So sometimes what you are looking to enforce is more difficult. And this intuitively. And I know our listeners know, because you're married to the man, for heaven's sakes. They're not going to get any better most of the time after the divorce.
Right. So now our last question to wrap up a very informative episode. We ask our clients a version of this question very often, actually, here at Florida Women's Law Group. So it's time to put you in the hot seat. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Ooh, JD. Well, in 5 years, my youngest will have graduated high school. So a lot of my time is, I look at it based on my children's milestones and what they're going to be doing.
Of course.
So I do see myself still running the firm. I see us with having a few new locations. And maybe depending on where you go to law school, JD, we'll open up a location
yes.
to suit your needs, right? And let you help clients somewhere. But
I would love that.
I will have, that with that. And for all our listeners and everybody, that's a big milestone. So there will be maybe a perceived freedom, but maybe we'll be visiting different areas more where they are in school. So, maybe I will open other locations. If all my kids end up in Tallahassee at FSU, maybe we'll open an office over there, and I'll do more traveling. Hopefully I'll be doing more speaking on things, for women and the law, expanding this podcast, and and just bringing the little chihuahuas around with me.
That is great. Well, wherever the future takes you, I'm excited to watch it and hopefully be a part of it. So that's awesome.
Well, thank you so much, JD, for switching seats with me today and doing such a great job with your interviewing skills. But we've reached the end of our show. And, of course, if you want to help JD and her quest for law school, you can find her here at FloridaWomen'sLawGroup.com. And you can send her and post questions to any of our social media or blogs on things that you'd like to see more of on the podcast, because she is very intricately involved with us in creating content. So we would love that. And, if you or someone is going through divorce, of course, reach out to us at FloridaWomen'sLawGroup.com or join our Facebook group, Women Winning Divorce. We're really working on elevating that conversation and creating a community where women are safe to talk with other women and really help lift them up and promote them in a